we believe if you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. The problem is, audits are hard. Yet we've issued over 20,000 reports to 2,000 clients worldwide.
Having blinders on and you're just working requirement by requirement, you're missing the larger point of this.
Cybersecurity and compliance will no longer be a mystery.
All right, and we are live. Welcome in, everybody. My name is Allie Krings. This is our cybersecurity mission, and today we're sitting down with Joseph Kirkpatrick, the president of Kirkpatrick Price. Joseph, thanks for sitting down with me.
Of course, looking forward to talking through what I've been doing this week.
I mean, it's been a big week for you. I know you've been traveling. You've been talking a lot about, getting that certification ready for somebody for ISO 27001. So I guess let's just start from the very top. What is ISO 27001?
It's a standard that's published by the International Organization on Standardization. 27001 is an information security management system certification. And it's really special to me because our firm started in 2005, and that was the same year that 27001 was published. And so I always like to think of 2005 as the year of information security because a lot of firms like ours started that year. A lot of new standards came out that year. And anyway, it's really regarded as kind of the grandparent of all the information security frameworks.
So this came out in 2005, and I'm sure since then, 20 years, nothing about it has changed at all. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, in a way, there's a lot the same in 20 years, but it has gone through two updates since then. It was updated in 2013, and it was updated again in 2022. And, largely the same, but there were some changes each revision that, made it a little bit more current with the times.
So tell us, why would a company want to get that ISO 27001 certification?
It's well regarded, it's well known. When you say that you are ISO 27001 certified, it means something, especially if you are working with international clients. It's a standard that comes out of Europe, and people over there are very, very familiar with it. It's still very well known in the United States as well. So it comes with some credibility, when you have that certification.
Do you recommend it for all companies, or is there more like a niche that you really recommend they get that certification?
I don't necessarily recommend that everyone go for certification. I do recommend the principles of ISO 27001, because it's a very formal risk management framework. It gives you a very good way of thinking about how to assess risk and implement controls according to, the risks that you rank within your own organization. So the principles, I encourage everyone, to buy a copy of the standard and, utilize it as a reference for your own information security program, because it's a great benchmark to use in that way.
So obviously we can see that you are not currently at the Kirkpatrick Price headquarters. You've been out assisting a client all week. Tell us a little bit about where you've been, what's been going on.
Yeah, so I'm in New York City. I've just finished working through a client's ISO certification. And I was just here as a good partner. That's one of our values at Kirkpatrick Price. We want to be a good partner to our clients, and that means sitting on the same side of the table as them to help defend them against threats. And sometimes the threat takes the form of a malicious entity that's attacking them, but sometimes it's a regulation or a client that is scrutinizing them. And so when we're sitting with them on their side of the table, we're just here to defend them and help communicate what it is that they're doing in terms of their information security program.
So when you go in as a partner for this, what kind of prep work do you have to do before? Are they asking you to kind of do like a checklist before they get this kind of certification?
So part of getting the certification is there's a requirement that you go through an independent review. And And that can't be the same party. So you choose your certifying body that you're going to use for the certification, but then you also have to do this independent review, which can't be the people who are certifying you. And so you can do that yourself if you have like an internal audit staff, for example. It has to be somebody who's
Sure.
operationally independent to do that independent review. But a lot of times people will select a company like ours to do the independent review. So we're sitting in the seat as the independent auditor who evaluated their program, and we've issued a report about their compliance with ISO
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
27001. And so with all of that knowledge and with all of that experience, we are in a great position to help them communicate what they're doing to the external auditor who's doing the certification.
I think it's really fascinating the way that Kirkpatrick Price operates, because you know that you've been in these shoes before. You want to be there as that partner collaboratively as the subject matter expert. So tell us kind of about that experience, and for companies who, or somebody who might be listening thinking about getting this certification, what is it like having you on their team, and what is your role when they go through that process?
Well, we want to walk through the whole process beginning to end so that they've gone through it before. I think about, I used to watch that show about the ninja competitions. I can't remember the name
Like
of
the
it right now.
American Ninja Warrior?
American Ninja Warrior, thank you. And so I used to watch that, and you're like, you don't want to go through that gauntlet the first
No.
time. That's not, you don't want to be surprised by how does this thing work, when you come upon the challenge and oh, there's water here, that I have to jump over. And so and you see the videos of the people getting ready and training, right?
Yeah.
And almost always they have built the set, just like what the final trial is going to be, right? And so that's the way I think about what we do. We want to take them through those paces. We want them to practice. By doing the audit first with us, it gives them a trial run, to prepare for the final certification. Because you don't want to be guessing and, thinking about it and researching it when the person who's certifying you is looking at you, so you want to be very confident about what you've done and how to talk about it.
Right.
And so really when we take you through that independent review first, you're getting some good practice.
So, I mean, you're kind of already doing the rope swings, you're already doing the climbing up on top, and
Right.
who knows what. I mean, it's so much work when you think about American Ninja Warrior, so I'm glad you put it in such an easy, relatable term. But then here you are, in New York City. So talk to us about maybe some of the findings that you did see during the certification process.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share in real time while it's all fresh. I just have come out of it. And so just to kind of share what it's like and what it goes through. First of all, when you go through this, you might deal with a different auditor each time.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have a mindset that, you will strive to understand the way this auditor thinks, because every auditor picks on different things. Every auditor thinks this is more important than that. And then you get somebody where it's flip-flopped, And so that can be frustrating, dealing with that. But that's just kind of the way that it is. And so it's almost like having a mindset, like a test-taking mindset, a strategy for how you enter it. And you can't get too bent out of shape about that. You just have
Sure.
to go with the flow and, go, okay, well, I'm trying to satisfy this auditor. And so
Mm-hmm.
let's make sure that we speak their language and we treat as important, what it is that they're saying. But when you go through the ISO 27001 process, you start off with a stage 1 audit, and that's where they're coming in and they are going through your documentation primarily. They perform some interviews, they look at your documentation, and they try to understand if you are ready to be audited or not. And so there might be findings out of that stage 1 that you have to correct before you can move on to the stage 2, which is the actual audit, the one that produces the certification if you pass.
Sure.
And there are different levels of findings. There are minor nonconformities. there are major nonconformities. And, minor nonconformities are things that are not insurmountable. You can, rectify those things. It's the major nonconformities that can hold you back from your goal of certification.
Can
And
you
so,
give us an example of both? Like what would be a minor find? What would be like a major find in that stage one?
yeah. So I'll start off with a major one. Like a major finding would be, you don't have all of the requirements for ISO
Mm-hmm.
27001 documented in your ISMS. And so you haven't addressed the requirements, how you're going to approach them, how you're going to handle them, what it is that you do. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. And
Okay.
so that would be a major nonconformity because you just aren't satisfying the required clauses that are contained within 27001. Whereas a minor nonconformity, yeah, you talk about your information security objectives, you have assigned responsibilities, but you didn't specifically say like what the person was going to provide to management to review, and you need
Okay.
to do that. You need to update that in your documentation. And so it's a minor issue, but it's something you need to do, and
Yep.
so hopefully that explained a difference between minor and major.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful to just kind of feel out what this can look like and what it can feel like. But let's go back to you and kind of your few days that you've had here in New York City. Tell us more about your experience and what kind of findings was the auditor seeing, and how were you able to, rectify it or work through it with your client?
Yeah, so this was the final culmination. This week
Okay.
was the stage two audit. And the stage one audit happened a little over 2 months ago. And out of that audit, there were 5 or 6 minor nonconformities, things that they needed to address. So when this stage two audit started this week, that was the first
Hmm.
thing the auditor wanted to cover. What did you do with the findings from the stage one? Show me what you've done. Show me how you tracked that.
Hmm.
Show me your corrective actions. And so he wanted to make sure that we, had resolved that
Right.
before we moved forward. And so that's kind of how everything started. And once we satisfied that, then we just started at the top, and we started just going top to bottom through the standard, and showing him evidence about how these things are implemented. That's really more of the focus. Stage one is like the design of your program. Um, Whereas stage two is more of, okay, we need to prove now that these things are implemented. And so just to share my screen and show you like the language of this from the ISO 27001 standard, the version that was
Okay.
released in 2022. So everything starts with clause 4, the context of the organization. And so we have to talk about what the organization is, what are the
Hmm.
external and internal issues that the organization faces, who are the interested parties that the organization deals with, who are interested in this level of compliance with this standard, establishing the boundaries and the applicability of the system, establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving the ISMS. And then we go through how the organization is structured and the leadership that supports this program and endorses the program throughout the organization. We deal with planning and
Interesting.
support. And so one by one, the auditor, we talked about 7.2, and then we talked about 7.3, and then we talked about 7.4. And so
Hmm.
we just had to show proof, that each of these clauses was in place. And then finally, when you get to the end of the clauses, there's an Annex A, it's referred to as, and Annex A.5 is organizational controls. And those are things like policies and procedures, roles and responsibilities, kind of how the organization functions. And then after we got through A.5, we moved on to A.6, which is the people controls. And that's what we like to say is human resources, background checks and training and hiring and terminations. And then when we finished that, we moved into A.7, which is physical controls. And so that's
Wow.
access controls, video monitoring, sensitive areas, and environmental controls like generators and cooling and battery backups. And then we finished out today. Today was the last day, and it was all about A.8, which was technological controls. And that's the technical things that you do for information security, like network monitoring and patching and anti-malware and software configurations, hardware configurations, all of that. And so it really was a top to bottom process this week. The auditor wanted to see that each and every one of these things was implemented according to our scope, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But
Yeah.
but how's that strike you right there, all that work that we did this week?
I can see why there's such a lengthy process to prepare for this, because it would be overwhelming to just go in a little bit blind. There's so many different areas and procedures and processes that you need to have nailed down. In your conversations with this client leading up to their ISO 27001 certification, how did you empower them to know that they could achieve this?
Well, having gone through this a number of times, I know that it's not a winning strategy to look at that list and go, okay, we're going to go through all this stuff. It overwhelms people. It shuts them down. People
Yeah.
stop coming to our meetings. They stop returning our phone calls and our emails. And I'm not even joking about that. I mean, that's how people react, to this like list of requirements, right? And so you can't focus on the requirements. And so you use the word empower. Um, I think the way that you help an organization tackle something this challenging is through the foundation of risk assessment. Okay.
Okay.
Every organization is different. What each organization does is different. You'll have one organization that develops software. You have another organization that protects boxes of data, right? And
Okay.
boxes of data backups and things like that. Two totally different businesses, right? You'll have a business that does managed services for someone. And so you have to start with, what are your risks? And there's a standard for that. ISO 27005 is the standard for conducting a risk assessment. And when you do that, you understand where your risks are, and then you go to that Annex A that I had up on the screen, and you say, which of these controls do we need to implement in order to address this risk that we have? And I think that there's something about that that helps the brain get around all the controls, because you might select 5 or 6 of those controls to help you manage one risk. And it's just a healthier way to think about it, because if you're having blinders on and you're just working requirement by requirement, you're missing the larger point of this, which is we're trying to protect our organization. We're
Yep.
trying to protect our clients. And so we have to think in terms of risk and which controls we're going to implement. And so I think it does empower people about how to do this, and really it focuses them on the why instead of the what.
Yeah.
And the why is a little more motivating for people sometimes.
Totally. So you mentioned that you wanted to get into like the scope of this. Walk us through
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So this process that I just talked about with risk assessment helps you decide which things are in scope and which things
Okay.
aren't in scope. And so I gave that example of those 3 different companies, right, that do
Sure.
different services. And so somebody who's doing software development and managed services, something like technical vulnerability management is going to be extremely important for those organizations, because they're going to have software to
Sure. Right.
patch. Whereas an organization that's protecting boxes
Yeah.
of paper and tapes, there are no patches for, those kinds of things other than maybe a few small, small quantity of systems that are running the software that runs your access control or something. This is applicable in this scenario. It's not applicable in this scenario. And so when you establish your scope, you're documenting in what's called a statement of applicability. These are the ISO controls that are applicable for us, and these are the ISO controls that aren't. And you document your justification about why or why not you're selecting these controls. And that is just like a really, really important cornerstone for ISO certification. You have to be at a place where you can articulate that.
Fascinating. So I read like an analogy about like ISO 27001, that it's kind of like a home security system, and that you're really trying to figure out, okay, what kind of alarm settings and physical measures do we need in our house? Who gets the keys? Who doesn't? So that we're really able to protect what's in our house and who has access to the things in our house. Is that kind of
Yeah,
where we're
for
at?
sure. And think about all the neighborhoods, think about all the zip codes in the country. You're going to face different risks in different places. If you have
Right.
a swimming pool or a pond near your home, you're going to have a different risk that you deal with versus a place that doesn't have that. If you are living in a neighborhood and you hear that your neighbor was just broken into, that changes your risk appetite, perhaps, and you start thinking about, okay, what additional controls can I put in place because this event just happened? And so, that's your information security management system at work. You're constantly monitoring and evaluating the risk that you're facing and whether or not your controls are doing what you want them to do. Because I've been to businesses where they're in a business park where you walk in the front door and the front door isn't locked, and you walk up to a reception thing, you say, "Hi, I'm Joseph. I want to get my ID and get a visitor's pass to come in." And I've gone to customers where the door is locked, there are bars on the windows, and they have to buzz you in and they escort you, and it's like, "Hey, why do you have all of these controls?" Well, we've had numerous break-ins. We've had, I was at one business one time where, the guy had a gun on his hip, and he said,
Wow.
"Yeah, we have shootings, like, bullets have broken our windows before." And so, you are constantly monitoring your environment and selecting the controls that are appropriate to you, because bars on the windows aren't going to be the same all the time for every
No.
business.
No, I love the way that's just such an easy way to think about it, because when we do start getting into information securities, sometimes it does feel overwhelming because there's so many little pieces. Who are the people in an organization that need to be involved in getting this certification?
I was just talking to this client about this today, and he told me the story. He said, when this started, I did this all by myself. He said, my boss told me I had to do it. They voluntold me to do this, and I did it for 5 or 6 years by myself without any help.
Wow.
And he said it finally got to a point where I couldn't do it by myself anymore. And what I noticed with them was they had the HR person assigned to the people controls, right? They had a person in engineering who was responsible for the facility controls. And so that person was responsible for generators and battery backups and cooling systems and maintenance records and monitoring the effectiveness of the environment. And then there were people on the IT team who had responsibility for technological controls, right? But then there was someone at a director level, and there was someone at a VP level who had responsibility for more of those clauses dealing with, management review, understanding the needs of the organization. Somebody in leadership is going to have to be involved with those kinds of things. And so now they've got, 5 or 6 different people who are involved in this, whereas when they first started, it was just one.
And I think that's where you as a partner, in all of your experience come into such a big play because sure, somebody else who works in computer security, this might be, apples to apples and speaking the same language, but you're trying to get people involved who they're not talking about this kind of stuff every day. So having you as a partner there must feel kind of like a sense of relief to know you've got a translator.
I think you should get a partner to help you through something like this.
Yeah.
You select someone, and they were killing two birds with one stone.
Hmm.
I didn't design anything for them. I
Yeah.
didn't implement anything for them, but I audited what they had and I found the problems before these people found the problems. And so, that's why they wanted to work with us, and that's why they wanted us in the room so that we could say, this is what we audited and this is what we found. And so that's really important to have a subject matter expert. I think the thing that I kept having to remind the
Yeah.
auditor about over and over again was what this company did, because sometimes they would start to go down a road about something being important that really wasn't important to what this company did. And I felt like I brought a lot of value this week in that
Cool.
way because
Hmm.
I was there to kind of defend them from unnecessary work, because sometimes somebody coming in cold, they're just not going to understand all of that. But I would
Yeah.
love to show, just kind of out of the week, just the things that are fresh on my mind, like that this auditor picked on. Um,
That'd be awesome.
just to share with somebody else who's getting ready for this, that, hey, these were things that the auditors were kind of keying in on. So I'm just going to share a sanitized version of an ISMS.
No, I think that's a great call to kind of share how this auditor was looking at their systems in place. And um, because of course everybody's going to have their own kind of preferences or biases, so they find those little nuances and maybe get stuck to them. So it feels good to have these real world examples in real time. So I'm glad we're doing this while it's still so fresh for you. So, and again, you've kind of already scrubbed this, so we're looking at the ISMS on screen now. Walk us through some of these findings.
Yeah, so the ISMS is the information security policy on steroids. It's a manual that guides the organization through their their system for managing information security according to the ISO 27001 framework. And so I just wanted to
Hmm.
point out the areas that this auditor really keyed in on, because I think that it would help other people who are thinking about this. And so the first thing was internal and external issues. The last two certifications I've gone through with clients, the auditor has really emphasized internal and external issues. And so I don't know if that's a result
Hmm.
of some training that has happened or what it is,
Sure.
but it's basically, you know, thinking about what those issues are that are relevant to your system. And so external issues, uh, some great examples would be regulatory issues. You can't
Hmm.
control laws and regulations that get passed, um, for you, things that are happening in your industry, things that your competitors are doing, things that an adversary might, try to do to you. And then climate change was a new consideration that was put into the standard in 2023, I believe it was. And so thinking about these external things that
Hmm.
can affect you, and then internal considerations would be, what your company's mission and direction might be saying to you, what dependencies you have in terms of like vendors that you rely upon and things like that. Um, and your employees, like needs that are coming from your employees. And so both of my last two certifications that I've gone through, they really focused on this. And so they wanted to see some
Hmm.
thoughtfulness around, that we knew what the internal and external issues were. And so then they really focused on the needs and expectations of these interested parties. And so this this client had a parent company, and so they had a lot of interaction with kind of a home office in another country, and so that was an interested party. They recognized us as an interested party because we were their auditor, and we
Sure.
were, pushing them for certain evidence and things like that. Other interested parties are management, customers, suppliers, the certification body, your insurer, your competitors, government agencies. And so they made us, this is one of the things that they wanted us to change between stage 1 and stage 2. They wanted 2 columns, one, talking about who it is and what the relationship looks like, and then they wanted a separate column to talk about what the needs and expectations were of that person. So that was a table that they had to create to get ready for the stage 2. And then the next thing was down in 6.2, I believe it was. Well, no, 6.1.2, they really keyed in a lot on risk assessment. That has always been true for ISO 27001. If you are not articulate in risk assessment methodologies, and if you are not able to use your risk assessment to show the auditor how you prioritize risks and how you select controls to address those risks, you're just not going to be successful with the certification process. And so this always gets a lot of attention. Okay, how often did you say you were going to do it? Okay, did you do it? Okay, who was involved in it? What did you do with the results? Did you communicate it to management? Did someone sign off on it? Did someone decide which risks you were going to address and which treatment method you were going to use? Like, there's a lot of communication around how you do the risk assessment. And one thing that a lot of people miss is that they do it annually, but they don't do it after a significant change. And so, you've got a key leader that leaves, you take on a big new client, you've got a critical vendor that changes, you've had a data breach, some significant change like that, you should sit down and update your risk assessment.
Oh, interesting.
And,
I think
so rare that people do.
It's really nice that you point out, even if it's a management change or, a person in leadership, because it does feel a little bit obvious to do it annually, or a little bit obvious to do this after there's been a, God forbid, but a catastrophe, right? Why is it so critical to do it even when you have somebody in leadership leave?
Sometimes the culture changes, when a key leader leaves, the meeting structure changes, but there's also a real risk that something doesn't get handed off, and that to me is why risk assessment is so important when a leader changes, because you can get to your annual requirement to do it and you say, okay, what's the status of, the vulnerabilities that we've been dealing with in our software, and the new person could just not be aware of what existed previously and what the issues were. And, they don't have a full appreciation for where things left off. And so I just think that's a critical change that has to be recognized.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really a great call out.
So they spent a lot of time on that. This was another thing that they asked them to do after the stage 1 audit. They wanted to see a table that took the information security objectives that they had identified in their policy, and they had like 6 different objectives, and they wanted them to put together documentation about how they were going to achieve the objective. And it's like, at first I kind of rolled my eyes about it, and I was just like, this is just a pointless exercise that you're putting us to. But it turned out to be very valuable for them, because to actually sit down and think about, how is our information security management system going to support our corporate mission? How are we going to do that? Who's going to be responsible for that? When are we going to complete that? And so let me give an example of something that had a date on it. So this was one right here, that their one of their objectives was that they were going to update their documentation due to some standards updating. It was specifically related to a new PCI standard. But, they had a due date of March 31st because we were doing this, just a few weeks after that. And so it was something that they had to get done. They assigned it to a senior specialist, and they put the plan in place, they put the thought into it, and it helped them to achieve the objective. So that was a specific thing
Wow.
that this auditor called out. But I have to say that the biggest issue, and I'm just going to scroll down to this, the biggest issue that they were really keying in on this year was management review. And
Really?
if you think about it, that can become very just, you don't even realize a manager signs off on something and doesn't read it. I mean, how many times does that happen? And so they wanted to see that the issues that came out of their risk assessment, their internal audit, incidents that happened throughout the year, they wanted to see that the organization was tracking those issues and that management was involved and was overseeing it and was driving the completion of, resolving those things and monitoring those things. And so they had to completely redesign how they were doing this, because what they were
Wow.
doing before was really just a rote exercise. The manager really wasn't aware of what was actually happening. And so they put together, a new reporting system in order to document all of the issues and tickets, and make sure that that report got delivered to a monthly meeting with the leadership team, so that the leadership team got more involved in overseeing the information security issues that were being dealt with, and that leadership was driving it and asking for a status of that. And so I really thought that that was
Wow.
a very healthy thing that came out of
Yeah.
this for them, because they weren't doing that before, and
Mm-hmm.
the people were responsible for it, but the executive leadership just was kind of unaware of what was going on. And so so they really pounded management review this time.
It's interesting because it's one of those things that I think you could, like, a blanket question, ask anybody, hey, are you doing this thing? And everyone will nod and say, of course we're doing that. Of course we're doing that. And then when you dig in deep enough, you realize we are missing a few of those pieces here. Leadership hasn't been as involved as they should be. So it's kind of just a good, I'm glad you brought up that example, because it's just such a good reminder of what every organization should be doing, whether they're getting their ISO 27001 certification or not.
And that's what risk management is.
Yeah.
Executive leaders are so used to dealing with financial risk.
Mm-hmm.
Are we meeting our goals? Are we short of our budget? Do we need to lay off staff?
Right.
How do we report this to the shareholders? That's so normal for them. And you've really just got to plug information security into that, because it's that big of an issue now for every organization, because a data breach can impact your bottom line by the tune of millions of dollars. And so, you just have to get executives to think that way and understand that, yeah, we're monitoring this.
Yep.
And we're understanding how it's going to affect the bottom line and how it's going to affect our reputation as an organization. And so that's what risk management is. It's just a wheel where you're constantly, evaluating what you're doing and reassessing the risk that you're facing, and you're considering the changes to your environment. And so, yeah, it's a very, very healthy process to go through. I think that the organization this week did fabulous.
Awesome.
They were happy that there were findings. My contact said at one point, well, this is what we pay for. We pay for you guys to find things so that we can improve. And that's what
It's a
we
great
want out of these.
perspective.
So it's a great attitude. And everything was successful. The auditor said that he was going to recommend them for certification. And, when an auditor
Wonderful.
says those words, like you can see the people in the room smile and relax, that,
Like all of
oh,
a sudden they finish the American Ninja Warrior and
that's
like
right.
they can
That's
stop
right.
training for
They
this
hit
big
that,
event.
they hit that button at the end, and I can't remember what happens. Are there fireworks? I can't remember.
I'm not even sure. Like I would assume there's like a prize in some way, or maybe it's just like a great dinner with family that night out,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I think it's really just helpful to break this down, hear more about your insights. And I do want to invite everybody who's been joining us for this kind of webinar, this episode, that you can always go to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast and you can answer or you can submit your own questions. So if there is a certification that you have questions on, or maybe you do have a specific scenario in your business that you kind of want to get a little insight on, we'd love to sit down and kind of dive into that and help answer some of those questions. So please do. And Joseph, I always love sitting down with you. Is there anything else you want to cover before we head off?
Just be aware of all the different frameworks that are out there. ISO 27001 might not be the right one for you, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the principles that I shared today apply to any framework as far as like how you attack compliance with these
Sure.
different ones that are out there. So, but reach out, like you said, if you send us a question, we will personally answer it. We're very accessible and available to answer your question. So you just let us know how we can help you.
Awesome. Well, I am super glad that we had this conversation, Joseph. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Our friends who are joining us on our cybersecurity mission, thank you for the time to kind of dig into a topic that might be a little bit hot on your brain. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
When you work with a Kirkpatrick Price cybersecurity auditor, you work with someone who's been in your shoes. Let's see what the next expert is ready to share to support you in your cybersecurity mission.
Hi, I'm Chris Paradise. I'm an information security auditor at Kirkpatrick Price. I've been here about 3 years. My experience is primarily in information security compliance audits, ISO 27001. I've been doing information security for about 15 years, IT for about 30 years. I have a degree in computer science and also CISSP, CISSM, certified ethical hacker, and CSSLP, software security lifecycle professional. I have worked for multiple Fortune 500 companies, leading them through the ISO 27001 certification process and through the FedRAMP, federal certification process. And I enjoy doing that because companies have goals and objectives that they want to meet, and as the security landscape changes, their customers have expectations for them to meet those requirements. They want to know that their information is secure. So I like to work with companies through these compliance efforts to help them reach their goals, their objectives, to help them, maximize their services for their clients, but also make sure that their clients feel secure and that their information is secure.
If you want to prepare for success with regulatory compliance, visit kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or the show notes to download today's episode resources. We're here to empower you to face your cybersecurity and compliance challenges. Are you ready to join a community of 10,000 people who are working together to elevate the standards for cybersecurity and compliance? It's free to sign up at kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or check the show notes and achieve greater levels of assurance today. Thanks for joining us on our cybersecurity mission.